Hi guys, well, we've got our exam on chapters 16 and 17 coming up, and I just wanted to load a video here, a review video for that exam, just to let you know what to take a look at and where to concentrate your study efforts and where to and also identify that portion of the chapter that you really don't have to concern yourself with. So let's start with chapter 16. What I'd like for you to take a look at is, rather than doing it here, we'll just go forward. And the chapter starts off talking about what process costing is, process cost operations, and what types of products are processed through that process. And a process really is when you're think of it as an assembly line where you just have products going by and there's really no start or stop to the job, like tennis balls here, glue, things like that. So process costing, you really can't track costs by a particular job. So we track it by department, and then at the end of the month, compare the costs to what we produced, what's actually done and gone, and what's still here, and then go through that four-step process to allocate the costs. Comparing the process costing to job order costing. There's going to be a couple questions on that into what the difference between them are. So just know that in a job order cost system, we use job cost sheets, and there's only one work in process account. But in a process costing, we don't have job cost sheets because we don't have jobs. We use those what are called process cost sheets. Is that what they are? Process cost sheets. And we have multiple work in process accounts, and jobs will not jobs, but products go through various departments, and each work in process account represents a particular department. Let's see. Know so that's good. Equivalent units of production, understand what that concept is, converting partial units into the equivalent whole units they represent. It's just multiplying the number of units times the percentage they are complete to arrive at the converting them into whole equivalent units. We are using only the weighted average. The FIFO method is in the appendix, but as it says down here, we are using the weighted average method. That's the only one we need to know, so don't concern yourself with anything else. Then, preparing that process cost sheet is a four-step process. Number one, okay, well, before we do that, I'm going to call up the process cost sheet. And let's see what we got here. I'm going to open, this is the one that I loaded at Canvas. And I think it works well to help us to understand what it is that we're trying to arrive at. There we go. Okay, so the first step that they say here is determine the physical flow of units. Don't even concern yourself with dollars and cents. Just what's the physical flow? And that is this. That is, just know that, oops. Get this up here. Bring this back. There we go. Just know the physical flow of units, which are these items right there. Yeah. Know how many units I started with, and then how many brand new ones I actually began during the month. That's the total number of units to account for. Where are they now? Well, this is the number of units that I've completed and the number that are still here. Those two have to match. So what we're doing is we're just getting a handle on the physical units. Second, compute the equivalent units of production. That's taking the units that were completed and the ones that are still here and converting them into equivalent units of production, one for direct material costs and one for conversion costs, because they may be at different levels of completion with regard to both costs. They may be 100% complete with regard to materials, but only 20% converted. Or they may be 0% completed with regard to materials, but 50% converted because materials are added at the end. So we could end up with different units of production, equivalent units of production at the for materials and conversion costs. Third, compute the cost per unit, cost per equivalent unit. That's simply taking the direct materials, and that is the direct materials in beginning inventory and the direct materials I added this period, add them up and divide by the equivalent units of production for direct materials to arrive at the cost per equivalent unit. Same thing for conversion costs. Start with what's in beginning inventory plus what we added this period divided by the equivalent units of production for conversion costs. That gives you equivalent unit per, or the cost per equivalent unit of conversion cost. Finally, now that we have the equivalent units of production, assign and reconcile costs. Use those costs to assign the cost to the units completed, the ones that are done, and every one of them would have a full bore cost here. And ending inventory. And ending inventory, we have to just be careful that these per unit costs represent whole unit costs. So when I'm assigning costs to that ending inventory, we're going to assign these whole unit costs times the number of whole units they represent. Those are the 4 steps in preparing the process cost numbers for every department for every month. And they walk through the explanation here. Yeah. Watch the videos here. I think they're helpful. They're both visual and audio. I don't think that can hurt to have them both. Process cost summary. It's a little different than the one that I use. I don't think it's quite as easy to follow, but it's all the information's here. The same information, just organized a little differently, presented a little differently, actually. And I think you can stop right about there. Whoops. What am I doing wrong here? I guess no, I guess you can't. I think that this is kind of old hash. These are the journal entries in process costing. And buying raw materials is exactly the same thing. Assigning raw materials. Well, raw materials is no longer going to be going to just one work in process account. It may be going to multiple work in process accounts, multiple departments. One raw material inventory, multiple work in process departments. Indirect materials, same thing that we saw in prior chapters. Labor costs. Labor costs will be no longer just debited to one work in process account. It's multiple work in process accounts. Indirect labor, same entry. Paying wages, same entry. Factory overhead, accumulating factory overhead, same entry. Assigning factory overhead. Again, multiple work in process entries. It's the only difference is that we have multiple work in process entries. No entries on transfers across departments. And we didn't go that far into it. Just know that if you have Department A, Department B, and Department C, a product will start accumulating costs, the materials, labor, and overhead in Department A, and when it's done in that department and it's accumulated costs, it will not go to finished goods. We're not going to transfer those costs to finished goods. We're going to transfer it to Department B to get more costs added to it. And then we're going to transfer it out of there to Department C. And then it's going to leave Department C and go to finished goods. No questions on this trends in processing. So that's it in this chapter. That's it. I wanted to look at some multiple choice questions. Now these are multiple choice questions from the prior text, different publisher, from the Wiley book, which I think Wiley did a better job in this chapter than this one does. And so these questions are from their textbook. So these will not be the ones on the exam, but they generally ask the same questions. So I thought, well, let's just look at about a dozen of them or so, and let's just see what we got here. So I'm going to go back this way. I'm going to look at it like this. Okay. So if we were to ask you, Multiple choice, that's what this exam is going to be. Multiple choice, probably 20 questions from each chapter. It says, which of the following items is not characteristic of a process cost system? Which one is not? So 3 of them are. Once production begins, it continues until the finished product emerges. So that is, yeah, once it begins, that is a characteristic. The products produced are heterogeneous in nature, which means they're much different. And the answer that would be the answer. That is not a characteristic. A characteristic of process costing is they are homogeneous. Every product's just like the one before it and probably just like the one after it. So, but always look at the other ones. The focus is on continually producing homogeneous products. That's what process costing is. Going to make tennis balls day in and day out. D, when the finished product emerges, all units have precisely the same amount of materials, labor, and overhead. Yeah. Yep. Because we're spreading it over the number of units produced. How about number 2? Indicate which of the following is not correct. So 3 of these are true, 1 is not. Both job order and process cost systems track the same 3 cost elements: direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. Absolutely. Kind of show you what they're saying here. We have a raw materials account. This is finished goods, factory overhead. In job order costing, direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. And when the job is done, it gets transferred to finished goods. The only difference between that and process costing is we have multiple work in process accounts, which have direct material, direct labor, and factory overhead. So it doesn't leave here, it comes down to here and gets added even more. And then it comes down here and gets added even more. And then it goes to finished goods. So this question says, both the job order and process cost systems track direct materials, labor, and overhead? And the answer is yes, it does. It's just tracking the materials going to 3 different departments, labor going to 3 different departments, and factory overhead going to 3 different departments. They do track the same costs. Job order cost system uses only one work in process account, where a process cost system uses multiple accounts. That's true. Just showed that. Manufacturing costs are accumulated in the same way in a job order and a process cost system. That's true. We accumulate them in the same way. They're accumulated in work in process accounts. D, manufacturing costs are assigned the same way in a job order cost and in a processing costing. Nope. Even though we have the same costs and the costs are accumulated, what accumulated means is that we keep track of our raw materials and our direct labor and our factory overhead. The actual charges, they're accumulated the very same way, but the way that they're assigned is different. And that is D is false. They are not assigned in the same way. Three, in a process cost system, the flows of costs are what? Work in process, cost of goods sold, and finished goods? No. Finished goods, work in process, cost of goods sold? No. Finished goods, cost of goods sold? No. Work in process, finished goods, cost of goods sold? Yes. Yeah. Multiple work in processes, but it's still the same. Work in process, finished goods, cost of goods sold. 4, in making journal entries to assign raw materials in a process cost system, well, I know they're going to be assigned to various departments, whoever is using those raw materials. Debits finished goods inventory? Debits finished goods? No. We're talking about this entry right here. Often debits one or more work in process accounts? Yes. Yep, debits it debits multiple work in process accounts? Yes. Generally credits 2 or more work in process accounts? Nope. It's always we're charging raw materials used. Credits finished goods? Yeah. In a process cost system, manufacturing overhead, so we're looking at this account, is assigned to finished goods at the end of each accounting period. Let me read that again. In a process cost system, manufacturing overhead is assigned to finished goods. Well, it's assigned at the end of the accounting period, but not to finished goods. It's assigned to work in process. Is assigned to work in process accounts for each job as the job is completed? No, we don't have jobs in a process cost system. Is assigned to a work in process account for each production department on the basis of a predetermined overhead rate? Yes. Yeah, it's assigned to a work in process account for each department based on a predetermined rate. D is assigned to work in process account for each production department as overhead costs are incurred. Nope, they're done at the end of the month. Hey, what are conversion costs? Conversion costs are the sum of, and it's the costs that I incur to convert raw materials to finished goods. They are labor costs and overhead costs, direct labor and overhead. Actually, labor and overhead. Some of that labor is direct labor and some of it's in overhead, but those are the conversion costs. Oh, good, some numbers to crunch. Mixing department's output during the period consists of 20,000 units completed and transferred and 5,000 units in ending work in process, 60% complete to materials and conversion costs. Beginning inventory is 1,000 units, 40% complete as to materials and conversion costs. The equivalent units of production are. Okay, so let me lay that out here real quick. This is an example of the physical getting a handle, or computing, I'm sorry, getting a handle on the equivalent units of production. So it said, remember that we have a beginning inventory and then started. We have done and ending inventory. It said we completed 20,000. We still have 5,000 in ending inventory, which are 40% complete with regard to both materials and conversion costs. No, I'm sorry, 60. 60% complete. It also said that beginning inventory consisted of 1,000 units that were 40% complete. They want to know what are the equivalent units of production. Well, we don't look over here. Now, they could have asked us how many units did we actually start. Well, we could have figured that out. We finished 20,000 and we still have 5, so we've got 25,000. 1,000 came from beginning inventory. We must have started 24,000, but it didn't ask for that. It wants equivalent units of production. And to calculate equivalent units of production, we look at the units done and the ones that are still here. The done ones represent 20,000, and the equivalent units of production in ending inventory, 5,000 at 60%, that's 3,000. Looks like it's 23,000, and that's the same for both materials and conversion costs because they are both 60% complete with regard to materials and conversion costs. So the answer is B, 23,000. Even though this does exist, we don't use beginning inventory in what we started to convert or to compute equivalent units of production. We use the ones that are done and the ones that are still here. This company, there are 0 units in beginning work in process, 7,000 started into production, 500 units in ending work in process, 20% complete. The physical units to be accounted for are. Okay, well again, it told us that 0 units in beginning inventory, 7,000 units started, 500 in ending inventory, and it's asking for the physical units to be accounted for. The physical units are 7,000. It didn't ask this, but how many units did I actually finish? Must have been 6,500 because that's got a total. But this is the physical units. That's what we know has to match. Mora Company has 2,000 units in beginning work in process, 20% complete as to conversion costs. 23,000 units transferred out to finished goods, and 3,000 units in ending work in process, 33% complete as to conversion costs. Beginning and ending inventory is fully complete as to materials, which means that they're added at the beginning of the process. Equivalent units of production for materials and conversion costs are, okay, let me grab another sheet of paper here. Now remember, for equivalent units of production, we're looking at the ones that are done and what's in ending inventory. They said that 9,000 units are transferred out. 3,000 units are still in ending work in process. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh my gosh, I'm looking at the wrong one. Let's do that again. Number 9, right? Number 9 here. Mora Company has 2,000 units in beginning work in process, 20% complete. Since they're asking for equivalent units of production, I don't care what was in beginning inventory. I want to know what's done and what's in ending inventory. 23,000 units are transferred out to finished goods. 3,000 units are in ending work in process. 33 1/3% complete as to conversion costs. So conversion costs are, well, 1/3 complete, 33 1/3%. Beginning and ending inventory are fully complete. So with regard to direct materials, they are 100% complete. Now they want to know what are equivalent units of production for direct materials and conversion costs. Well, 23,000 are totally complete with regard to them all. And with regard to materials, the ending inventory, they are done. And they're only 1/3 complete with regard to conversion costs. So 3,000, 1/3 complete, represent 1,000 complete. So equivalent units of production for materials and conversion costs are 26,000 and 24,000 respectively. C. Okay. Next question, number 10. Forkner Company has no beginning work in process, and 9,000 units are transferred out. 3,000 units in ending work in process are 1/3 finished as to conversion costs, fully complete as to regard to materials. If total material cost is 60,000, the unit material cost is what? Well, here's where I would recognize, well, in order to get the material cost, I need the direct material total cost divided by the equivalent units of production for direct materials. That will give me, that's what they're asking for, that per unit cost. Well, in order to get that, I need the equivalent units of production for direct materials, don't I? So in order to get equivalent units of production for direct materials, I need to know what's done and what's in ending inventory. Done is, let me see, there are no beginning work in process. 9,000 units are transferred out. And 3,000 units in ending inventory. 1/3 finished as to conversion costs, fully complete with regard to materials. So they're not asking about conversion costs, they're just asking about materials. So the 9,000 that are complete represent 9,000 units. The 3,000 that are complete with regard to materials represent 3,000 units, so that's 12,000. They told me material costs are 60,000. Divided by the 12,000 equivalent units of production looks like $5 to me. A. Yeah. It's just a matter of laying it out. You can't do it in your head. If you can, well, then you're better at this than I am. I got to lay it out so I can see what's going on. Let's do another one. Largo Company has unit costs of $10 for materials. So they've already gone through this process. Direct materials are $10 per unit. $30 for conversion costs. So they've already gone through that. So I would say that I know then that the total unit cost was $40 per unit. They've already done that for me. if there are 2,500 units in ending work in process, okay, 2,500 units, 40% complete as to conversion costs. I'm up here, 40% complete as to conversion costs, and fully complete with regard to materials. The total cost assignable to that ending work in process is what? Well, I'd say this. Well, I want to know the equivalent units of production for materials and for conversion costs that are in this ending inventory. Well, this ending inventory, they are complete with regard to material costs, so they represent 2,500 units with regard to materials. And with regard to conversion, they represent how many equivalent units? 2,500 times 40%, that's 1,000. So what cost should I assign to these 2,500 units then? Well, one whole unit has $10 of materials. These represent 2,500 units for materials. That's $25,000. And one whole unit has $30 of conversion costs. These 2,500 units represent 1,000 whole units. That's $30,000. So the total cost assigned is $55,000 to ending inventory. B. Yeah. Hey, what does a production cost report show? Is it an external report? Or what does it show? I mean, what is it? Is it an external report? No, it's internal. It's only for internal. We don't give it to anybody outside the company. Shows both production quantity and cost data related to the department? Yes. Shows equivalent units of production, but not physical units? No. Shows both of them. Contains 6 sections? It actually contains, I think, 4. Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of what to look for. Be familiar with the production cost report, the steps in calculating the unit cost for the month for a particular department for materials and for conversion costs, as well as assigning those costs to those the units that are done, and just be familiar with the entries involved. And the only difference in the entries is the direct materials being used, the direct labor being used, and factory overhead being assigned to multiple work in process accounts, not just one. So that'll be this chapter. There won't be one big problem for you to do, but I'm sure they'll ask questions just like that, giving you some data and asking certain questions about it. Now let's look at the next chapter. The second chapter on this exam will be chapter 17, activity-based costing. And as you recall, this chapter deals with how we're going to be allocating factory overhead. How do we charge factory overhead to our work in process accounts? If I'm a job order cost system, how are we going to charge it to jobs? Or if I'm a process cost system, how am I going to charge it to those multiple processes? So we're still going to use a predetermined rate, but in activity-based costing or departmental-based costing, we're going to come up with not just one rate for the entire plant, the plant-wide rate, but we're going to come up with a rate for each department or each activity. And it takes a little bit more number crunching, but you get a better costing model as a result of that. So if we have 6 departments, then we're going to allocate our factory overhead, the entire factory overhead, to those 6 departments, come up with an application rate for each department, and then charge out products based on how much they utilize that particular department. So if a product does not go through Department A, it will not get charged any of A. And that's what this chapter is all about. So what do we have to look for? Let's see here. We'll start on this page, 766, and assigning overhead costs. Yeah, and this is what we just said. A plant-wide rate uses one rate. Departmental rate uses a rate for each department. And an activity-based actually uses a rate for each activity. So we actually go beyond the constraints of just departments, but we look at activities as well. Then they go through this example in the chapter that we went through, talking about first doing the plant-wide rate. And in the plant-wide rate, I think there was a nice diagram here. Here it is. We have one plant, so we have one overhead. We're gonna come up with one rate. We're gonna spread our entire overhead using one rate and charge it to products. Each product gets charged one rate. But in departmental, we're going to take our overhead costs and and allocate that to our departments. This example has two, so we're going to have two rates. And then each product will be charged a portion of each department's rate if it utilizes that department. Activity-based costing is pretty much just like departmental. We're just not defining we're not breaking our factory overhead down by department, we're breaking it down by activity. So here's where you take our overhead cost. We identified 3 different activities, so we allocate our overhead to each of 3 different activities, come up with a rate for each one. Therefore, we have 3 rates. And then we charge for each product a proportionate amount of that activity's rate if it utilizes that activity. So the concept and the computations for activity-based costing are exactly the same as departmental-based costing. You could just interchange the terms. You change department to activity, and it's exactly the same thing. Yeah, the way you do it is you identify the activities or the departments, and then break down the overhead into those activities or departments. Compute the overhead rates by dividing each department's overhead by some rate, amount per purchase order or per labor hour or per employee or per something. And then we assign those costs to a cost object, which is a product, based on how much they utilize that. Differences between the activity-based costing and multiple department rates? Not much. Won't be any questions on that. Know the advantages and disadvantages. The advantages of activity-based costing. Definitely more effective cost control. We are spending a lot of time and we're getting very familiar with our overhead costs, even by just simply allocating them to activities. We're addressing every overhead cost. So we are getting a better feel and a better control of our overhead. And because we're going to this additional amount of work, we're getting better pricing decisions, better costing decisions. Disadvantages. Yeah, it takes a lot of time. It takes time to implement and can be confusing and it's not perfect. Some product cost distortions remain. It's not perfect. We're still dealing with factory overhead. We're getting more precise, but it's not getting exactly precise. So there is still some uncertainty. Those are the disadvantages. Know where costs, at what level they're assigned. Are costs assigned for every unit I produce, or for every batch I run, like a setup cost, or for every product I produce, like maybe a registration cost for every product, regardless of how many batches I run or how many units I produce, or is it incurred at the factory level or facility level? Sorry, like the president's salary or the rent on the factory. Yeah, we're going to pay a certain amount of rent regardless of how many products I make or batches I run or units I make. We have a nice example here. Yeah, you can probably stop right about stop studying right about there. That's I'm certain you would agree that that's enough right here. That's where I would stop, is in this section. And these are just examples of the unit, batch, product, and facility level costs. But that's where you can stop. Again, multiple choice questions. I think this text actually has just a few multiple choice questions. Let's see, where are they? Coming up real soon. Know the terms. Ah, here we go. Multiple choice questions. Okay. See what we can come up with. In comparison to a traditional cost system where we only have one rate, and where there are batch level or product level costs, an activity-based costing system, we're not going to get that detailed into it. This is really understanding activity-based costing. We're not going to get that far into it. Yeah, the answer is down here. It does say it's B, but I don't expect you to be that familiar with it to answer theoretical questions. I just want you to be able to work with it. How about 2? What is 2? Which of the following statements is true? Let's see if this is a good one. An activity-based costing system is generally easier to implement and maintain than a traditional cost? No, it's more complex. It takes more time. So that's not true. Activity-based management eliminates waste by allocating costs to products that waste resources? No, that's not true. It doesn't eliminate waste. C, activity-based costing uses a single rate? Nope. Uses multiple rates, one for each activity. D, activity rates in an activity-based costing are computed by dividing the costs from the first stage allocation, that is from allocating all your overhead costs to various activities, that's your first stage. And so we're dividing those costs by the activity measure for that activity cost pool. And that's true. That's exactly what we do. We allocate first stage, the factory overhead to the activities. Then we divide that, each one of those, by an activity measure for each one of those pools. Like a purchasing department. We'll allocate the factory overhead to the purchasing department. That's first stage. And then we'll divide those costs by the number of purchase orders we plan to do to come up with a rate per purchase order. If a job takes 12 purchase orders, it gets charged 12 of those. Yeah. See, all of the following examples are of batch level activities except. So here's batch level. Which one is not batch level? Purchase order processing. I would say purchase order processing is probably batch level because we're going to purchase the direct materials that we need to run this batch. So that's probably a batch. Setting up equipment, that definitely is a batch level because we have to set it up for this particular batch. Clerical activity associated with processing purchase orders to purchase an order for a standard product. Clerical activity associated with processing purchase orders to produce an order for a standard product. Yeah, we're going to produce an order. That it would be. Employee recreational facilities. That's not batch level. That's facility level. Yeah. Did we get it right? D. Yep. Good. That's a facility. It doesn't matter how many batches I run or how many products I have. This is a facility level cost. Having an employee gym or cafeteria or something. Okay, here's a number crunching one. A company has 2 products, A and B. It uses activity-based costing and prepares the following analysis showing budgeted cost and activity for each of its 3 activities. So it had total, first recognize this, it has total factory overhead for the factory of what? A little over 500,000. But they went through first stage allocation and they allocated their total factory overhead to these 3 activities. Then they said that the budgeted activity for activity 1, this $80,000 of factory overhead to operate activity 1, product A is going to utilize 2,000 whatever it is and 800 of whatever it is. 200 purchase orders, 800 purchase orders. Possibly. Activity 2 could be based on, it could be based on machine hours, of which 1,000 machine hours is going to be used in A and 500 for B, for a grand total. So they've actually come up with they've determined how we're going to measure how much a product utilizes each activity. And they didn't define how they're doing it, but they did say there's going to be 1,000 of them in activity 1, 1,500 in activity 2, and 6,000 in activity 3. Annual production and sales level of product A is 18,188 units, and annual production and sales level of product B is 31,652. The approximate overhead cost per unit of B under activity-based costing is... Here's how I would attack that problem. So they said, we've got a factory here, and they didn't tell me this, but they did say that they've determined that there are 3 activities going on within this factory, and the factory overhead allocated to each one. A was 80,000, and I'm just putting what was on the example here, and this is in the back of the text. This is at the end of the chapter for you, 360. So this was the first stage 1 allocation. They took the total factory overhead and broke it down. Then they are dividing it by some driver. And in this problem, they didn't tell us what the driver is, but they did tell us how many of them there are going to be. Total of 1,000, because the A's were 200, the B's were 800. 1,500 of whatever they're using to measure activity or they measure the activity in B, of which 1,000 were the A's, 500 were the B's. And then C, there were 6,000 whatevers, 600 for the A's, 5,400s for the B. And you can see, wow, the B's really utilize this activity. They use 90% of this activity. They only use 1/3 of this activity, and they use 80% of this activity. Well, the first thing we want to do is come up with a factory overhead rate for each activity. So $80,000 divided by 1,000, that's $8 a piece. $8 a piece. Well, let's just expand it out. It's $8 per whatever this is. And how many did the B's have? 800. That means it's going to be allocated 64,000 of this 80,000. Well, it makes sense, 80% of it, right? How about the activity, the second activity, 58,400 divided by 1,500 is 38.93 per whatever that is, however they're measuring it, times the 500 B is going to be using, 19,465. And then C, 360,000 divided by 6,000, that's $60 per whatever this is. And the B's are going to be using 5,400 of them. That is times 5,400 of them. Because recall, these are the B's. The only reason I'm doing B is because the question asks how much is going to be allocated to the B. So this is 324,000. So how much factory overhead is going to be allocated to the B's? Well, from activity 1 and activity 2 and activity 3, we add them up. That comes to be 407,465 in total. The question asked how much is being allocated to each unit. Well, how many units of B's did we make? It told us 31,652. So that comes up to 1,287 for every unit of B. For every unit of B. So again, we're just taking the factory overhead, and this is done before the year even starts. These are done with estimates. Breaking it down into either departments or activities, dividing it by some driver that I can measure how much a product is utilizing the activity, the total amount that every product is going to use, my estimate to come up with a rate, and then as a product goes through, I multiply it times the number of whatever these are that they're using. That came up with the total allocated to it. And if that particular job or process represents multiple units, then I can divide it by the number of units to get the cost per unit. Yeah. How about this? 5. A company uses activity-based costing to determine costs of its 2 products, A and B. So it's got 3 activities, 2 products. The budgeted cost and activity for each of the 3 cost activities are as follows. The activity rate under activity-based costing for activity 3. That's all they want to know is the rate. Well, activity 3 is going to have a total factory overhead of 14,000, and however it's going to measure usage of its particular activity. For example, if this is the car washing, this is how many cars are going to be washed. A total of 700 cars. What's the rate? 14,000 divided by 700, $20. So how much would be allocated to A? Well, $20 times 400. Yeah. How much to B? Well, 300 times $20. Yeah. Let's look at the prior text and see what those kind of questions look like. See if those will help us at all, like we did in the prior chapter. Okay, starts off with some theoretical questions. Activity-based costing or departmental-based costing, either one, can be used only in a process cost system? Nope. Whether I'm charging jobs or processes, I can use activity-based costing, and I'll just charge it to each job or each activity in accordance with how much it utilizes that particular activity. So that's not right. Focuses on units of production? No, it doesn't focus on units of production, because that would be process costing. C, focuses on activities needed to produce a good or perform a service. That's exactly what it does. What activities are actually needed to produce this good or to provide a service? And whatever activities there are, we're going to charge it factory overhead accordingly. If it does not need a particular activity, it doesn't get charged any of that activity. Finally, D, uses a single basis of allocation. Nope, uses multiple bases, one for each activity. Activity-based costing is the initial phase of converting to a just-in-time operating environment. We're not going to get into that, but that's not the answer. Can be used only in job order costing? No, it can be used in either one. Is a two-stage overhead cost allocation system that identifies activity cost pools and cost drivers. Yes, that's what it is. Two-stage. Two-stage. That is, first stage is allocating factory overhead to activities, and then second, dividing by a driver to get a rate. That's the two stages. An activity that causes resources to be consumed. An activity that causes them to be consumed that's a driver, cost driver. So it's just like in the purchase order department, the activity, the driver that we're going to use to measure how much a job utilizes the purchasing department is purchase orders. Purchase orders is the activity that causes a resource to be consumed. Requesting purchase orders. 4, which of the following would be the best cost driver for assembly cost pool? So we've got products that go through assembly. Some products need a lot of assembly, some don't need much assembly at all. So what would be a good measure as to looking at a particular product as to how much it utilizes the assembly cost pool? The number of product lines? Nah, I mean that doesn't drive how much we need in assembly. Number of parts? Wow, that sounds good. The more parts a product has, the longer of assembly time it takes. I'd say so. But check this. Number of orders? Nah. Square footage? No. Number of parts. That's the driver. That's the driver. So an assembly department would say our overhead for this year's, we estimate it to be $1 million, and that's because we're going to assemble 2 million parts. Well, that comes out to 50 cents per part. And if I have a job that comes through here that has 5,000 parts, it gets charged $2,500. 5,000 times 50 cents. The driver is the number of parts. That's what's driving the costs in assembly. The overhead rate for machine setups is $100 per setup. Oh my gosh, this is too easy. Products A and B have 60 or 80 and 60 setups. How much are we going to assign to each one? Well, A will have 80 times $100. B will have 60 times $100. So obviously that's answer B. Donna Crawford Company has identified an activity cost pool to which it has allocated estimated overhead of $1,920,000. It is determined, so I'm going to write that down, that's the overhead of that activity. It is determined that the expected use of cost drivers for that activity is to be 160,000 inspections. So maybe the activity is inspections, and we plan to do 160,000 inspections. That's what drives the cost of inspections. And if you want to reduce your total cost of inspections, reduce the number of inspections. That comes out to $12 per inspection. Widgets require 40,000 inspections, gadgets require 30,000, and targets require 90,000. How much overhead are we going to charge to each one? Well, it's $12. So widgets will have 40,000 times $12. That's 480,000. Well, I'd say D is the answer then. It's the only one that does right. B has 30,000 at $12 an hour. That's 360. And then targets have 90,000 at $12. That's 1,080,000. So this one they actually had us compute the rate and then assign it to the products based on how much they utilize that activity. Frequently cited limitation of activity-based costing. When people don't like activity-based costing, what's one of the frequently cited valid complaints? Not that, oh, it's too hard, but is it that ABC results in more cost pools being used to assign overhead costs to products? No, that's not a limitation. That's an advantage, that we have more cost pools, better control. B, certain overhead costs remain to be allocated by some arbitrary means, such as labor or machine hours. That's true. Especially in that first stage allocation where we're allocating like utilities to activities, that's not a perfect allocation. It may be based on square footage of the factory occupied by that activity. So that's still an arbitrary allocation. So some arbitrary allocations still exist. That's one limitation. ABC leads to poorer management decisions. No, it leads to better costing. Results in less control? Nope. Results in more control, because we spend a lot of time massaging these overhead numbers. Better control. When should a company use ABC costing? Well, before we answer this question, a company should use it if it has a lot of different products that go through the factory in a lot of different sequences, and some products utilize a lot of the departments, some products utilize just a couple of the departments. So if we have very differing products, this is when it's really beneficial. So it should consider using it if overhead costs constitute a small portion of product costs. Well, if overhead is a very small portion of my product costs, then I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to allocate these few bucks. So it should be considered if overhead costs constitute a large total, then it really warrants the time to work with these overhead costs. So it's not A. It has only a few product lines that require similar degrees of support. Well, if they only got a couple, 3 products and they all go through the same process, well then ABC is not going to do any good. Direct labor constitutes a significant part of the total product cost, and a high correlation exists between labor and changes in overhead costs. Oh, let me read that again. That is, direct labor constitutes a significant part of the total product cost. So direct labor really is a huge cost, and there is a high correlation between that cost and overhead. Well, then ABC wouldn't be very beneficial. We can use just one rate, the plant-wide rate, based on direct labor, because direct labor is a significant cost and there's a high correlation between labor and overhead. Well, one rate will work then. D, its product lines differ greatly in volume and manufacturing complexity. Yes, that's where we want to use multiple rates to account for those variations in product costing. An activity that adds cost to the product but does not increase its perceived value is called what? Well, is it called a value-added activity? Nope, it just said it doesn't add value. Cost driver? No. Cost benefit? No. Non-value-added activity? That's what it is. A non-value-added activity. I don't think that there's not going to be questions on that. So, what activity is value-added? Storage of raw materials, that doesn't add value. Storing raw materials. If you can cut down on your storage costs, it's not going to affect the value of your product. You're going to save money. Moving parts from machine to machine, that's not value added. That's just if you can cut down the moving costs, that'll cut down your costs without affecting quality. Shaping a piece of metal on a lathe, that's value added. That you got to do that, otherwise you're still just working with a piece of wood. Relevant factory level, the facility level. A relevant facility level cost driver for heating costs would be what? What do you think would be a good driver to determine how much a product or process should be charged for heating cost? Well, I think I'd go with, what do you think? If you're saying square footage, I'd say that's probably right. Heating costs probably don't have anything to do with machine hours or direct materials unless they have to be heated, kept warm, but square footage. Yeah. What's the first step in the development of an activity-based costing system for a service company? What is the first step? Well, the first step is to identify your activities or departments and allocate your factory overhead to those, right? So identify and classify activities and allocate overhead to cost pools? Yes. Identify the activities and allocate your overhead to them accordingly. Assign overhead costs to products, that's the last step. Identify cost drivers, that's the second to the last step. Compute overhead rates, that's what you do second after you have identified the activities and their drivers. So there you go. Now we're not going to do these ones in asterisks because those are the appendix, and the appendixes are the same in this text as they were the others. So anyway, that's what's to look forward to on the exam. Multiple choice questions, process costing, activity-based costing. The good news is this is probably going to be one of the tougher exams. But the good news is after this, we're going to have a couple chapters that I think are a little bit easier, and they're a little bit more fun. At least they're more fun to teach than these, because these are a little bit more complex. So anyway, please continue to review the homework. Work on the homework. Let me know if you have any questions, and otherwise keep up the good work. We'll get you through.